Hey, how you doing?
Hey, man. I'm good. How are you? Long
Good. It's
time.
been a long time,
Yeah, it has. It has.
like a decade or something. I don't even know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks for reaching out. I really appreciate it. Happy to have you on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
So today my guest is Henry Xie, founder and CEO of Simple Fractal. Simple Fractal is a company that builds automation tools for applied behavior analysis therapy providers. Applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is a widely used treatment for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, as well as other developmental conditions. Henry and his team have developed over 100 production grade bots to help streamline complex workflows like billing, prior authorizations, and compliance. With a background in applied math, economics, and computer science from Harvard, Henry is on a mission to elevate human work by eliminating repetitive digital tasks, focusing on healthcare and human services. Henry, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
So, you build technology for ABA. Before we get into the actual tools, I'd love to start with the people that you help. So, for those unfamiliar, what is autism spectrum disorder?
Right. So, one way to think about it is autistic people are basically people who experience and relate to the world maybe a little bit differently from how or you or I might.
Mhm.
It is a spectrum, which means it's wide. This also necessitates customized treatment plans, etc. But it's essentially neurodiverse individuals that might operate a little bit differently. Um, they may not enjoy social interaction as much. They may find more comfort in routines. And they also sometimes have this almost superhuman ability for hyperfocus,
Mm.
which is really interesting and I think could be great for humanity.
Okay. So, what exactly is applied behavior analysis therapy? Who typically receives ABA therapy?
Right. So I'd say the autistic population is the main population. So applied behavior analysis, or ABA for short, is essentially a technique to help autistic individuals more easily integrate into regular society using science-backed methods, essentially behavioral science. So a lot of positive reinforcement and breaking down skills into smaller pieces, etc. And the way I see it is it essentially helps um, autistic individuals integrate into society a little bit more easily. It helps their families live a more normal life. But I do want to be careful with the language here because it's not necessarily about like forcing autistic people to be normal per se. To me, it's more about avoiding the isolation that would most likely otherwise occur. So with ABA, you'll learn skills like eye contact or social skills or being able to hold a conversation. It just makes it easier for autistic individuals to integrate with regular society, which then could bring more, I think, more dialogue, more interaction. Because a lot of our most influential individuals actually are on the spectrum,
Right.
right? If like just to take tech, I mean, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Bill Gates are all on the spectrum,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of people believe that famous scientists like Einstein or Newton or musicians like Mozart as well were on the spectrum.
So, you keep bringing up the idea of the spectrum. Is there the idea that you're kind of diagnosed somewhere on the spectrum and then you become someone who might benefit from this type of therapy?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think to get reimbursed for treatment, you have to be diagnosed,
Mhm.
and the diagnosis rate has increased steadily in the United States. I think now it's one in every 30 or 33 kids gets diagnosed with autism. Um, Bill Gates, I believe this is right. He said that if he had been diagnosed with current methodologies when he was a child, he would have been diagnosed with autism. But I'm not sure. I don't believe he was back then when he was a child. That said, this type of treatment is not necessarily restricted to people with autism.
Okay.
Um, like you mentioned, I mean, it's also used for other conditions, uh, intellectual learning disabilities, but also, interestingly, anybody or regular people, kind of like you alluded to. It's just called something different. So when this is used within business, it's OBM. I think it's organizational behavior management.
Okay.
Um, I believe is what it stands for, but essentially using the same techniques to incentivize and reward and really get desirable behaviors within an organization, if that makes sense.
Okay. I know we're talking about autism quite a bit. Why do you think, or do you know why autism diagnosis has increased?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't claim to know the answer. I believe it's due to better screening techniques and better awareness. I
Okay.
don't think I personally believe it's not necessarily that, oh, we're just having a lot more autistic individuals today.
Right.
I think there were probably a lot of undiagnosed autistic individuals in the past, and we're just
Okay.
better at screening for it and diagnosing it, that we can address it accordingly.
So when and why did you start Simple Fractal?
Yeah, so I started Simple Fractal quite some time ago. So it was in 2013. And at the time, it was for a much more naive reason. I really just wanted to write code where I could feel the impact of the problem that I solved.
Mhm.
Really, that was kind of it. And it sounds rather banal, but it's actually rather easy to write a bunch of code that maybe doesn't solve a problem at all, or solve a very shallow problem in a way, maybe for a lot of people, but a shallow problem where you don't feel the same way that I would like to feel about the problems that I solve. So that was really the original motivation, and it meant that we worked much more closely with a narrower client base, if you will, really honing in. We worked in multiple industries, and like you mentioned, we had the pleasure of working with Wharton as well at one point. And we just try to identify what are the problems, which problems are worth solving, and how can we apply technology to produce problem solution fit. That's really the origin story of Simple Fractal.
Okay. I was going to ask, because you said you really wanted to feel the impact. My next question was, did you only take on specific projects that you believed in? Or was there an approach, this
Yeah.
is a new company, we need to make money, let's just take projects?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that's probably both have been true at different parts of company history.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, I mean, we couldn't be picky, right? We would just take anything that we could get, right, and learn from it,
Okay.
do a great job, and then expand from there. But one thing I would say is that we were always, still today, pretty critical in the discovery process of, like, why should we even solve this problem? It goes back to the impact thing.
Yeah.
And really hone in on, like, why is this even worth solving? Like, why does this matter if we solve it for you?
Right.
Right. In this way, make sure that we direct efforts and resources into areas that actually make a difference. And so in that sense, we've been more, I don't know if you want to call it like picky. So like if someone can't do that, we essentially mutually disqualify the project, right?
Okay.
Because it's like, okay, well, this doesn't make sense. So you don't want to pay money for it because it's not really solving a meaningful enough problem for you. And then I will happily not do it.
Okay.
Right? I want all of the work that we do to really have a meaningful impact for our clients.
So how did you get into the ABA space?
Right. So that didn't happen until 2018. And it was a little bit of randomness. We had a revenue cycle consultant that knew of the quality of our work bring us in because they had a challenge, right, with this national ABA provider. Essentially, they weren't posting things right. So for the uninitiated, posting just means recording in the system who paid for what.
Okay.
Right? So in healthcare, insurance pays sometimes to pay the right amount, sometimes to pay less. And it's making sure, okay, well, what did they pay for? What's still outstanding? What should I go and appeal, etc. And so if you don't do that right, you're essentially flying blind financially.
Yeah.
You might have millions or tens of millions of dollars in AR that you don't know if you can truly collect on, or which ones you should prioritize. And actually, incidentally, as part of the project, we identified almost $1 million that they would have lost because they just forgot to bill it.
Okay.
They just didn't bill it. And so it was basically disarray from a posting standpoint, therefore financial visibility standpoint. The revenue cycle consultant knew what the process was. I didn't know. at the time.
Mhm.
They had tried to enact the process with in-house team and staff augmentation and just couldn't get it to work with sufficient accuracy. There was just a lot of inconsistencies and human error, basically.
Mhm.
But since they knew what the process was, we were like, okay, in this case, the solution is not to build a whole new billing system. It was pretty clear to us that wasn't going to be the case.
Right.
Instead, we built basically a bot, right, a digital worker to go and carry out this very rules-based process. And it was a great success. Like, we basically, on a go-forward basis, we processed, I want to say it was 99% plus of the volume. There's always some exceptions, but the vast majority of the volume were being handled correctly. And then I didn't know in the beginning, but then they came back and they said, okay, this is great. Now we have about 3 years worth that needs to be reposted because it was done wrong. And it's basically 70,000 checks, if you will, digital, but 70,000 insurance payments for thousands of dollars each or whatever. And we had to repost it with the same logic. And they're like, can you do that?
Mhm.
And I thought, well, in theory, it should work, right? Because it's the same rules. So we just built some infrastructure around auto scaling. So
Okay.
that's a superpower of these bots. Once you have a process encoded in the DNA of a bot, you can have it clone itself, essentially instantaneously on demand, and just divide and conquer
Right.
more volume with the exact same rules, same consistency. Right? So that's what we did. And so it spun up hundreds of clones. And we processed this backlog in a record, like less than 4 hours. And we found out from the platform that we outperformed 18,000 people who are logged on in terms of transactions done on the platform. And that was the day I had no idea what to expect, honestly. But that was the day I was like, oh my God, this is actually really, really powerful. Like digital labor this way is very, very powerful when done right. And so that's when I decided to double down on it.
Okay.
And, so did our clients. So, they're still a client today. Some 7 years later, we've done lots of projects with them.
Okay. So your introduction to the ABA space started with one project. It was enhancing a billing system or the way that the billing system was used.
Yes.
So you enhance the efficiency around that billing system.
Both the efficiency and the accuracy. I think the thing to remember, right, is like we have all these digital tools and they can be great. And the more freedom you get on these digital tools, also the more user error there could be.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of the times, if you don't have the right process or you don't have the right training, it's difficult to operate. And it's difficult also to scale your operations because most of our clients can relate to, having a superstar employee who just knows everything about how to build Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then, they double their volume, and then, they try to train somebody else, and it's just not the same. All of that goes away with bots.
What was the technology you used for that first bot in 2018?
We used a combination of Python and JavaScript. I'm pretty sure we still did that back then, and we still do to some extent. And we build on top of AWS and serverless. Since then, we built more, I guess, proprietary layers around essentially building blocks or logging or monitoring and things like this that make it easier to compose these bots, if you will.
Okay.
But most of our bots are still composed or customized to our clients' needs.
What's different about this in the ABA space that couldn't be applied to some other industry or some other company that has a billing system that wants to enhance their processes?
Oh, sure.
Is there anything nuanced about ABA?
No,
Okay.
not really. I mean, there are certain factors for maybe why it's surfaced there, but there's nothing about the technology that prevents it from being used elsewhere. The reason why we built a niche in ABA is really just because of path dependency and
Right.
early success in the space, right? It's just we did this and we first made a splash within the organization. It was actually a really wonderful thing to see where people are like, well, how did you solve this thing? It's like with bots, like what are bots? They're like, well, they're like these things, like they can use a browser, they can use our billing system just the same way you and I could, just like with superhuman speed and precision. They're like, what? If you could solve that, could you think a bot could work over here?
Yeah.
And we essentially spread across the revenue cycle revenue cycle management. So that was payment postings. That's very back end of things. There's billing, there's claim scrubbing, there's secondary billing, patient responsibility, there's a bunch of stuff, right? And we virtually touched every aspect of it. And then other departments, they wake up and you have client services and HR and compliance. They're like, wait a minute, like, can we also do stuff? And we've done stuff with them too. And then, it's spread across the industry. So there's nothing fundamental about the technology that limits it to ABA. I will say, I think it's been easier for us to expand in ABA because everyone knows that we're by far the most established and experienced player when it comes to automation in this particular domain. Right. So the domain expertise, the various modules, the different platforms, even authority on process at this point, because we've seen so many different processes, has given us like the authority, right? Become an authority in the space, essentially.
So they do have a unique process, probably. Every company in a different industry is going to have a different process for billing, but the technology might be the same.
Yes, both the platform could be the same, like the underlying billing system, and the technology for the bot could also be the same, like the same stack, so to speak. But the process, the operations, may be different. Sometimes it's because of different technology ecosystems, like, oh, we use this EHR, but we use this HRS system, or this payroll system, or this credentialing system, and we want it all to connect, for example. Like once you start combining things, more uniqueness can occur. It could be due to M&A history very frequently. So it's like, oh, well, we're composed of like 7 different companies that used to be in different systems and, have legacy data or legacy process or whatever, which requires, greater degree of customization.
What other types of problems have you solved in the ABA space, creating these bots?
I would say, so everything that I mentioned so far, even though it's been very high level, I would put it into the umbrella of what I call digital labor. Digital labor is essentially the notion of taking away what I like to think of as kind of like the drudgery, like the repetitive but very necessary grunt work, like the daily transactions of things that need to happen, right? Whether it be, payments to post or claims need to go out the door or something like that. It's digital labor in the sense that it's happening in the digital world, right? It just needs to get done. Quite often it's rules-based and automation works very well. There's another aspect that we kind of stumbled upon, which I think is a less intuitive use case for bots and automation, which is we're calling the concept Sentinel. And it's essentially supervision of digital workflows. So I'll give you an example. So like the use case, one of the first use cases where we did this was unconverted appointments, it's called, which basically means that a therapy session happened or like an encounter with a patient happened, but the requisite documentation wasn't completed. And so it's not ready to be billed. It's not ready to be sent out to a payer. Okay. Very often clinicians fall behind on this because they're busy. They got to go do their next session and they don't necessarily see that as the most important thing that they got to do, but it's the lifeblood of the organization. Like if you don't do that, you can't bill, you don't have revenue, you can't pay for anything.
Right.
And so what happens in most organizations is that there's like, I'm going to call it like ad hoc chasers. Like there's somebody in billing needs to chase down clinicians. Hey, can you please sign this thing or enter your notes or whatever. And nobody likes to do that. And it's inconsistent and it's not fun. And so we have bots that are able to do this in a much more helpful and streamlined way, to give them helpful reminders with hyperlinks, take them exactly to where they need to go. Like summaries, explanation of like how much revenue is being upheld, for example, reports, follow-ups, escalations where necessary. This is a very different use because it's not like the bot is converting the actual appointments. That would be akin to digital labor. It's not doing that. It's just making sure that it gets done. And there are countless processes like this, even within ABA, but more generally, which I think of as digital assembly lines. To think of patient intake or onboarding, for example. So I got to collect the insurance, I got to collect all the address information, I got to do this or that. double check their insurance and all this stuff. Okay, same thing when you hire somebody. Okay, I got to do training. I got to enter them in the HRS system. I got to put them in the EHR system. I got to make sure all this stuff matches. I got to make sure they have their driver's license. If it's, so there's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen. And usually, sometimes it's steps, sometimes there's dependencies, and there's different people owning different steps. It's very easy for things to fall through the cracks here. Very easy. It happens all the time. Someone drops the ball, nobody knows, and things just sit for a long time. So this Sentinel concept, essentially, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't care if there's like 2,000 different things going on at the same time. It can monitor every single one, know how long something is supposed to take, who's supposed to take this action, and prompt people accordingly and facilitate that action. And so, to me, that's been, I think, a less intuitive way to use this technology that I think has proven helpful to streamline these types of processes.
I can imagine how one bot works on its own. How do you manage this digital assembly line? How do you manage the workflow of multiple bots working together? It sounds like agents. Sounds like AI agents. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
I mean, conceptually, is it the same thing?
Yeah, very similar in some regards,
Okay.
right? I mean, I think it's very interesting in the AI revolution how we're just seeing the same stuff, also the same stuff with humans, right? How like we tend to do better with more specialized focused roles, and we work better in teams and things like this. But yeah, we have several clients where most of our clients, almost all of our clients, it's not a one-off project. There's several things. Some have engaged much more deeply, where they're like multi-year roadmaps of a lot of different technology that we're pulling together. And sometimes we manage all of that through like a centralized hub, if you will, where there is a human in the loop control. So for example, scheduling systems that we have built, and recommendation algorithms for that, where there is a place where staff can go, support staff can go, and view everything, take action, and then trigger off various bots or agents to perform certain tasks.
Okay.
And so yes, there are ways basically to bring it together.
What are some of the most common bottlenecks or inefficiencies you see in ABA operations? I mean, billing is one.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's like all kinds of bottlenecks, and it's different for different organizations, and even for the same organization, it kind of shifts over time, right? But it's in kind of the, if you think of like the client journey, we got a wait list of people waiting to receive ABA services, for example. That may be that could be a bottleneck. Verifying their insurance, getting them onto the EHR system, pairing them with a BCBA or behavioral therapist, scheduling the services, converting the services, like I had mentioned, right? So make sure that they're billable billing for them. Like along that whole life cycle, there are various bottlenecks, and it kind of makes sense, right? Because when you have like traditional human teams operating at each juncture, you're going to be staffing a certain size team, right, at each juncture. And it's very difficult to staff it exactly right, because humans we're not fractional. Like you can't do like 1.62 Brandons, on Friday and just 0.48 Brandons on Monday or whatever. You can't do that, right? So you have these, we come in individuals essentially, right? And so what ends up happening is that certain teams are stressed more than others, right? There might be more pressure on that. They might constitute a bottleneck, right? And then you hire another person, say, and then all that bottleneck goes away, and now it's somewhere else. And so that's one of the benefits, right, of this type of bot technology, because just like in the case with the 70,000 checks, it can scale up and down on demand, right? You got a little bit no problem. You got 10x the volume on a particular day because all the checks happen to come that particular day, no problem. The bot can just clone itself and get it all done, right? And so in this way, it really helps streamline. In practice, it forms a bottleneck somewhere else, right? Because now this flows through, and now the next thing becomes about, and I think that's also why we tend to work much more long term, right, with our customers to help resolve that next bottleneck for them.
Interesting. So when you bring on a new client and you're talking about some of the problems that they have, the problems that you need to solve with your technology, do you immediately think this client is similar to this other client we've worked with? We're going to clone these processes and bots that we use for this problem with this client. Like, is that part of your process when you bring in a new client? It's very similar to this client and their problems. Let's start with this solution and customize it.
Yes. So I'm gonna yes and no. So yes, that thought does come across, and very often our clients ask us this. It's like, hey, have you seen this elsewhere? What might you recommend for us? And the answer is usually yes, we have seen this elsewhere.
Yeah.
But the context may have been a little bit different. But because we have seen it elsewhere, we kind of know what works and what doesn't work, and it positions us really well to help find the right solution for them.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, in most cases, that doesn't mean that we can just copy paste the code and boom, it's plug and play and it will run.
Right.
But it means that we can extract insights, we can extract our experience, we can use these modules and layers that we've built to make it a lower risk and higher quality implementation for them. There also have been, some cases where it truly can be plug and play, or we invest a little bit more into refactoring so that it can be. And that's what we started more recently with our turnkey solutions, where the whole idea is you can configure them to some extent, but you can't customize them, because I don't want to keep changing the code base, basically.
Right.
And so you don't get the same control as with custom solutions, either now or in the future, but you get something that's more plug and play. And so we have that for like a handful of use cases, but it's hard. Like our desire is to, through this, be able to lower our prices and expand access of this technology to, the mid-market providers, as opposed to just the largest providers, for example. But it only works, right, if there is enough cluster demand, and if the turnkey solutions truly work for all of them. It completely falls apart when they say, oh yeah, but actually, can I just tweak this little thing and also maybe this thing, and then and then before you know it, you actually have like 20 forks of a code base as opposed to one, and it's just a nightmare to maintain.
Can you give me an example of a turnkey solution that you offer? Like, is there like a billing solution?
Yeah, there actually is. So yeah, I can use this example. So for providers in California, they have to do something called regional center billing to access state funds. And that happens on like a different state portal. And the entry of that is basically manual. And it needs to happen. There's only like a window, I think it's 4 or 5 business days every month, and you got to get all of your billing in then, or else you have to wait until the next month. And it just forms this really stressful time once a month. But like I said earlier, we don't have fractional people, and so it results in every other responsibility taking a backseat during that time, until we built a solution, right? So now essentially what we do is you can feed, we're calling this bot Reggie for regional centers. You can feed it the billing data that you have from whichever EHR system that you use. And Reggie will be smart enough to map it and then enter it into, there's actually 21 different regional centers in California, and you can do it on all of them, and then simply report back what it did and what's done, right? And so that's an example of a turnkey solution that we're therefore able to sell much cheaper than customized solutions. But yeah, I think, and we want to repeat this with other use cases, but the trick is finding the cluster demand where we can build a truly turnkey solution that doesn't end up being, a Frankenstein customized fork of code bases.
That makes sense. I think because, like you said, so you've already integrated with all these billing submission locations in California. You've taken care of that. That's kind of the back end. The front end is what you offer to your clients. Like, hey, all you need to do is download your data, upload it here, it'll process it, it'll take care of the submission or whatever that process looks like. You've already integrated with those 20 and some odd locations.
That's right. That's right.
Do a lot of your custom solutions become turnkey solutions?
Yeah, ask me in a few years, and I'll let you know. I think there is this desire, both from a mission standpoint and from a business standpoint, to take the learnings that we've had with the custom solutions. Like,
Yeah.
since starting a couple of years ago, our clients come to us and they're like, "Hey, you guys are great about customizing exactly what we need and building the solution for our exact process, but you've seen so much at this point. Maybe you should tell us how we should do things." Right? So
Hmm.
goes back to the point I was making earlier about, like, we actually have some authority on process now. It's tricky because when I talk to my engineering team, and I can relate because my background is engineering as well. It's like, oh yeah, it's not necessarily so easy to extract, refactor just the common components, knowing exactly what needs to be configurable from customized solutions, which maybe have been running for 5 years
Mhm.
and have had a couple of tweaks to them, and also need to fit into an ecosystem of other automation, other tech platforms that they use. And so it does require investment, basically, from our side. And that's what we've done, like with Reggie and a couple others.
Mhm.
Um, right now it's still a minority, right, of the business that we do. I think for the sake of the community that we serve, and I think it could be great business too, if we can successfully make this transition. And hey,
Yeah.
we have become the authority. We should use it to build more turnkey solutions, make that investment, get it right, expand access, and now like 100 different providers can use the same one as opposed to just one. Right? The way I see it is, like, bots are fantastic at achieving economies of scale. The 70,000 anecdote kind of proves that. So when an organization has that internally, it makes a lot of sense to do
Mhm.
bots. That's why we work with typically the larger providers. If you can't achieve it within one organization, I'm trying to help others by achieving it across organizations. Right? So again, if I can get 20, 30 organizations to use the same solution, the same code base, that's great economies of scale for everyone.
Right.
And I'm happy to share that with the market.
Do you have any competitors in this space?
Not exactly, I would say not really like an apples to apples competitor. Like, there are other automation platforms for sure.
Yeah.
They're not, they don't really have a, like, they don't really match in terms of track record and experience and expertise in this particular domain, for example.
Right.
We're also a little bit different in that we're full service, meaning we go all the way from identifying meaningful problems, which came from the history of how Simple Fractal was formed, to maintaining your solutions over the
Right.
years. Like,
Okay.
there are others also who come, hey, they're like, yeah, we build it, and then boom, they just throw it over the fence, right? You deal with this,
Yeah.
and then very often they don't have longevity. Like, for us, the payment posting example that I mentioned, that bot, even though it was the first one, still runs every night today.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of that.
That's interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about the technology that you used, at least for that first automation. Can you walk us through the tech stack that's used currently for your bots and also managing the bots and your infrastructure? What does that look like?
Sure. I can talk about it in broad strokes. I mean, I think it's similar. So we will use Python, we will use JavaScript, we'll use a framework like Puppeteer.
Okay.
We'll build, which for the uninitiated is basically a way to control browsers. We'll build layers on top of that, and then these constitute these Lego building blocks, if you will, and we can compose these different solutions. We use a framework called serverless to deploy,
Mhm.
and by default, we always deploy to AWS. I
Okay.
think works great. And from there, we have different types of auto scaling and monitoring systems in place. The way that we organize our teams also is different. Where since a few years back, we separate development and maintenance. So we have a completely dedicated maintenance team. Like those engineers, all they do, because we have so many bots in production now, we got to make sure they run smoothly, right? And so those people are purely dedicated to that. How do we make sure monitoring works better? How to make sure that, we can be proactive about fixes? How to make sure we do those fixes quickly? How to make sure we do all our security patches? Things like that. That's what they do. And then a separately, development team that can stay on track for developing new projects.
So you mentioned browser, you mentioned Puppeteer to control a browser. Do these bots always run in a browser? I wasn't even thinking of that. I was thinking some of these bots just work on the back end, like they could access the back end of a billing system through an API or something like that. Do they always or generally operate in a browser to control the process?
So it's all of the above.
Okay.
So that's also sometimes like a misconception. I think some people think, oh, bots is only UI based automation, like UI path, right? It's
Right.
like, oh, go through the UI. But no, I mean, at least a firm like ours, we use every available technique to us.
Okay.
Right? The best one there is, right? So if we have backdoor access to the platform, which we sometimes do, we will use that.
Yeah.
If there's a public API, we will use that. If there's like private APIs that we could responsibly use, we could do that. If it's UI based, we know we can always fall back on that.
Yes.
And then also like bots do more than just stuff on these, you can also read documents, right? Similar to agents, right? Spreadsheets, emails, PDFs, texts, things like that. So you can integrate that all into the solution.
Can you tell me about like a recent project that you worked on where there were some real challenges with automating the process? Like there was no backdoor and controlling it in a browser was difficult. Like you were trying to, automate a workflow.
It's a good question. I'm sure there are many.
Because whenever you're trying to, I imagine, automate something in a browser, there's so many nuances, right?
I mean, I would say we usually overcome the problems, and maybe it's because of my background. Is because before founding Simple Fractal, I used to work at Yipit Data, and it's a very successful company, but essentially like a data aggregation company. And what we did is we built scrapers. When I was there, already close to thousands of scrapers, and now I'm sure tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And so there was already techniques necessary to make sure you can repair when websites change, for example.
Right. Yeah. Oh, right. And so websites change too. Yeah.
Right. And so I feel like we've kind of solved for that. There's still been cases where I can think of one recent case where we just advised against the project, which was someone wanted to automate something on a legacy HR system, and they said they claimed it was browser based. Turns out that the browser just gave a pixel by pixel and a portal into a very legacy based on-premise system. So there was nothing for these bots to hook onto, if you will, other than pixels.
Oh, wow.
And there are techniques to do that, but I was like, it's not robust. I would not recommend doing that. And it would have been, high effort for us anyway, and therefore expensive. And so I advise against it. But generally, if it's browser based, if it's a new system or whatever, it's not really a problem, because a browser needs to understand the system. So there's structure behind it, right? The DOM, the HTML, all this stuff. And bots are they're hooking onto that structure in operating everything.
Do you ever advise companies to migrate to different systems so that you can automate it? Do you change their internal, not just the process, but actually the infrastructure and the technology they're using? Hey, if you migrate to this newer HR system, then we can automate it.
The clients have asked. They were like, in considering which platform to migrate to, they already knew they were going to migrate, and they were like, hey, if we migrate to this one, would you be able to help us automate stuff there? Right. And so we have advised that way. I have not solicited migrations so far. And in some cases we're restricted from doing. But it's like, so I haven't gone to people and be like, oh, you need to get off this, and you need to get onto this specific platform. But when they decide that they need to get off and they're asking questions, I can help advise on which ones might be easier to integrate.
I see. What's the testing process for your bots or framework of bots? Like you have a new client. Okay, we're going to automate the system. It's a custom system you just built. How do you test it with the company?
Yeah, it's hard. It's challenging. I think we've figured it out, but it's not trivial. So we do all the traditional software stuff, right? You know,
Yeah.
automated tests and things like that. But at the end of the day, when we think we're done with development, we still got to put it out in the wild, right? And it's oftentimes doing a critical process, like billing or like posting. Like we can't get that stuff wrong. And so we use a kind of a combination of different approaches of consisting of, for example, dry runs. Dry runs are essentially go through all the motions without incurring any side effects. So, you know, for example, prepare the claim but don't submit it, for example, so that it's something that can then be manually reviewed for accuracy. So we can kind of have certain flags to stop it at certain points. We can limit the volume, right? So if we were going to do the 70,000 checks, I wasn't going to go and do that on the first try, right? What's a smaller subset, what's a smaller cohort we can test on that's still manageable to roll back and manageable to manually review? And we do this together with the client, and only when both sides are confident do we then lift the floodgates, if you will. And even when we do that, it can, if it's a very big volume, we tend to do it like gradually. So if they're in many different regions, we might do, oh, let's start with, you know, this particular region, and then let's do this one. And if all that goes well, then we can do the next 3. If that's been no hiccups, then we do everything like 2 weeks later or whatever. And so it's a combination of this. Whenever we can, which is not always, but whenever we can, it's like setting up specific staging environments, test environments, of course. Again, as part of normal development, we mock all this stuff out, right, during unit tests and things like that. But when it comes to interacting with the actual platform, staging environments are very, very helpful. Sometimes they don't exist.
Right.
Also, sometimes the data in it just sucks. Or it's like, it's just so unrepresentative that it wouldn't really be meaningful as a test anyway.
Yeah.
And so that's why we've had to develop these methodologies for responsibly rolling out, an automation solution for critical processes like this.
Yeah, I would imagine it's incredibly nuanced, especially with these custom solutions. And you need the right people at the company, right, to help you with the rollout, right? You need, like, do they select some subset of users that are going to test the system for some number of months after you roll it out? Does that happen? Like, okay, we don't want everyone using it necessarily, but we'll have 5 users, whatever, 5 out of 20 people generally use it. Use it for 3 months, track all the errors and bugs and things that go wrong, and you kind of work with them over that period of time?
Yes, it's usually a shorter period than that, but yes, essentially. And what we need them to do is to review the reports. So again, like bots are, well, we design our bots to be very transparent about the work that they do, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, go and whatever, file all these prior authorizations. It's like, okay, here was my workload for the day.
Yeah.
Here was what I was able to get done. Here's the hyperlinks so you can check my work, right? And here were like the 10 things I couldn't do.
Okay.
And here's the reason why I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
You know, whatever, I couldn't log in, or like I was expecting to see a URL in this field, but I didn't. And so I held off. And then what we need is help from our client. We do it too, but we need ultimately sign off from the client to say, everything that it said it did correctly, is that actually accurate? You know, is this true, right? And sometimes it does take a little bit longer if there is a very wide logic tree. Sometimes in billing, there's so many nuanced rules. It's different for Aetna. It's different for Florida Medicaid. It's different for TRICARE, different for whoever. And it can take some time before you hit every edge case. So even though everything looks really good, right, to your point, like if everything looks really good in the first 2 months, like, oh yeah, that's because we haven't billed some obscure payer yet, for example, or we haven't this particular scenario. And then when we do, we need to pay attention to that, right? And make fixes if necessary.
How are you using AI, if at all?
Yeah. So we do. I think it's increased over time. I would say our bread and butter is still like the traditional rules-based
Okay.
automation. Some
Mhm.
people back in the day would have, probably maybe called it AI. I didn't,
Right.
because I don't think it is. But and then gradually we would tack on certain AI-based like tools kind of at the ends, if you
Okay.
will. So things like computer vision or things like
Hmm.
recommendation algorithms or um, uh, like kind of almost like specialized ready-made AI capabilities
Yeah.
that you can tack on to a rules-based workflow, if you will.
Okay.
The analogy I use in my head to wrap my head around this is kind of like our bots are muscle cells, right? They're dumb, but they can get a lot of work done.
Yeah.
And then AI is more like the brain cells, right? And so our path has been like, okay, muscle, and
I
then like,
see.
okay, add on a couple brain cells here and there where we think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Since earlier this year, we've also tried, so we have like a little R&D section where we're going the other direction. So right, so we're going, okay, let's start with the brain cells
Oh.
and let's see and add more agency to it, right? So that's what all of agentic AI is, right? So
Yeah.
start with the brain cells, add some muscle cells essentially.
Okay.
And from what we're seeing, I think, I mean, it's developing very quickly. I could see that being a thing for sure. Right now, there's still different pros and cons. And I could see, what I'm interested in is like, we got to make sure we're aware of all the best tools and then use the best tools for the job for our clients. So what's better about the traditional rules-based RPA stuff is that it's more explicit because it's programmed.
Yeah.
It's therefore more like understood and easier to reason about. It is significantly faster to run. It's
Hmm.
cheaper to run. And you kind of have more control this way. It's also easier, in our experience so far, it's easier to make tweaks to it because you can just change the code very explicitly. AI has strengths in dealing with variance, right? So rules-based stuff can be brittle if you encounter slight differences in different portals, in different faxes or PDFs that you get or invoices that you get or whatever. AI can really shine there
Hmm.
because it can form that layer of interpretation that couldn't easily be programmed with explicit rules.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, the drawbacks, I would say, are it's slower. It can hallucinate still, right? So you can't necessarily count it doing the same thing, even if given the same directive. There are techniques being developed around that, with agents checking other agents and things like that. And I do think that could significantly improve things. But I think there's certain challenges there. And then yeah, it's just more expensive to run. It just takes more compute, and then it's slower as well. The slowness people try to solve by, oh yeah, we can, just like with bots, you can also have multiple agent clones. Again, sure, but are they 100% consistent with each other? How much computing resources will that take up, right? Is that economical? I think there's still a trade-off today.
Yeah.
That said, all of AI, including agentic AI, is developing very rapidly. And so we're keeping a close eye on it because if it ends up being better in every way, then we will use that.
The one thing you didn't mention was testing. I imagine a controlled system like your bots is much more easily testable, right? Because you can
Yes.
get the same
Yes.
results every time you programmed it. Whereas these more AI-based
Correct.
processes, it's hard to test them because you get something, like you said, they hallucinate, you get something different every time.
They're not deterministic, right? The same
Yeah.
way that the bots are. In fact, they can be inherently stochastic. But I think there are still other ways, other techniques that I could see that being solved.
Hmm.
Because it's the same with humans, right? Like, no human's going to be perfectly consistent. Although that has been a motivation for bot solutions in the past. But an AI agent, I think you can put certain checks and balances around it for like
Yeah.
a certain degree of accuracy, for example. maybe it's not 100%,
Yeah.
right? But maybe it's good enough if you get to 99%. Things like that I think will come into play. For me personally, what I think would be really interesting to see in the AI revolution in general is just the notion of liability and responsibility, in the sense that if you talk to Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, and it gives you brilliant insight, you're like, great. And then you have another chat and they're just making up some bullshit. And
Right.
you're like, oh my God, you can't distrust that person. You can't like fire that person. You're still interacting like kind of with the same entity.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it'll be same thing, with agentic AI. We're like, okay, usually you do a great job, and then sometimes you mess it up. What do? Like, can you kind of fire an agent and have a new one? Is that really possible? Like, it's different, right? With people, there's a sense of accountability. Like, if someone lies to you,
Right.
like, you can just choose not to trust that person anymore.
Right.
If someone screws you over, you can choose not to do business with them anymore. If somebody like is being dishonest or does a really bad job, you can terminate that person. That doesn't really exist
Yeah.
the same way, right? For AI, whether it's chatbots or agents. And so I think that'd be a really interesting problem to solve for.
Because what are you going to do? You fire an agent, you're just going to have to create another agent.
Yeah, right. It's like the same. It's like the same.
You're going to come up with some programmatic solution, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have the same notion of individuals, right? It's kind of like, yeah, it's hard because again, we're talking about clones, right? So if you have an agent clone itself, now you have 100 clones. Are they separate individuals? Or are they really the same blueprint? They're just in 100 different places at the same time? Or like, how do you? Because their brains are still wired the same, right? But then
Right.
again, there's some probabilistic way of how the neural network is going to go. And so, yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see.
What does your role as founder and CEO actually look like day to day?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what I love about it is that it changes so much over the years, right? Because I used to do everything, right? I think all founders do at some point. I think, I don't know actually, but I think I still have all the skills necessary to do the job, like end to end in the company. I haven't tested it, so I could be wrong
Yeah.
at this point. But what I've definitely realized right over the time, because now we're like 35 or something like that on the team, like I will have a bigger impact if I can lift somebody else. So I think a lot of it comes down to guiding and coaching. And I think providing the right opportunities to the right people, they just stretched a little bit, right, from their comfort zone. Still room to make mistakes and grow. So like a big part of our culture is like the growth mindset, right? And ownership and trust and meritocracy. And like I'm trying to keep all of that alive while coaching people into growing the company. And that's ultimately how I think it can have the biggest impact as a force multiplier.
What advice would you give to other founders building for healthcare or human services?
I think my advice, I mean, this is projecting off of my own experience a little bit, but I would say work closely with your customers and make sure you deliver. And these sound like easy things, but work closely. What I mean is like, I think a lot of founders might just assume that, oh yeah, like we've got the solution or like this is going to solve this or that. If you don't have deeper conversations, you may be rather wrong, about problem solution fit. Like having done so much custom work, working very closely with our customers, I could see that being an easy pitfall for a lot of founders. And the second thing is like make sure you deliver, because in healthcare in particular, I think many have been burnt by technology.
Yeah.
And there's a degree of skepticism, right? So if you just come there with smoke and mirrors and you're like, oh yeah, I just raised some money and like this is my thing and I do AI and blah blah blah,
All right.
and you don't really have the goods, I think it's gonna be tough. Like, for us, it took a longer time, but we really focused on making sure we deliver first, right? And then try to expand from there.
I feel like that could be applied to just about any industry now. Like work with your customers and deliver.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, it does. Yeah, I guess it's more general advice this
It's
way.
good advice. Yeah. Are you ready for the
Yeah.
lightning round?
Sure.
30 seconds each.
Okay, I'll see if I can do that. Yeah.
One underrated automation use case.
God, other than the Sentinel concept we talked about, I would say compliance. I think a lot more people should do compliance. They don't because there's maybe not as direct of a return, but audits and bots have a very similar thing, like one thing in common, which is rules. So I think that's underrated.
Favorite engineering tool.
I'm going to say Photo, even though I haven't really personally used it yet, but we recently rolled it out in the company, and I'm seeing it having a positive impact.
A book that's influenced how you lead.
I would say Sapiens, in the sense that our superpower is knowing how to collaborate. And like that's also very interesting and kind of happening in AI as well, right? With agentic teams. So I think collaboration that way. There's another kind of realization I had, which is maybe less obvious, which is like, Harari talks about the agricultural revolution and wheat and how it made us better as a species, but maybe not for individuals because we're like enslaved by the wheat. And I'm thinking about the digital revolution, right? And like EHRs and things like that. It's probably better overall, but it's also created all this, the necessary grunt work that I speak of, right? And so I think part of our mission, right? Our mission is to elevate human work, and I hope to be able to, free up or emancipate people from doing menial tasks like that.
That was more than 30 seconds, but I'll give you a pass.
I apologize.
One thing you've changed your mind about recently.
With regards to AI, I think it's becoming. I'm instructing my team to prioritize scouting, discerning, and adopting the right tools, as opposed to making your own tool, because they're coming out so fast.
Right.
I think the ones that are able to discern which ones are actually the good ones and use them well will win.
You mentioned that you do some experimentation on the AI side of things. What recent tools have you tried that you're impressed with that you may adopt on your team?
Oh, God, what was it called? One was Fast Agent. Another was, I think it's called LLM Anywhere.
Okay.
And these are, Fast Agent is basically allowing you to do a series of prompts with various different models, like chaining them together, which is cool. And LLM Anywhere is providing a framework to produce an interface similar to like ChatGPT and stuff, where you can produce your own internal AI tools.
Oh, that's cool. What's your favorite band right now?
I feel like I play more music than I listen to, honestly.
What do you play?
Mostly piano. So classic piano. Right now I'm into Rachmaninoff, and Chopin has always been a favorite.
Well, you can play that as well? Or are you listening to that?
Yeah. And no, I play it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
An activity you do outside of work, aside from piano?
Rock climbing, kickboxing.
Nice. Great. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This was great. I learned a lot.
Awesome. I
All right.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Henry. Good to see you.
Good fun. Yeah, you too. All right. Take care, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. If you like this, be sure to subscribe. More interviews and demos coming soon.